Well, the pace of change is clearly speeding up. And to help us understand what's happening, we have been joined by Nicola Millard, the Principal Innovation Partner at BT. Nicola, you've got a fantastic job, actually. You're spotting what's coming next. Give us a sense of what that involves.
Well, I used to officially be BT's futurologist as well, but I have to say I got a crystal ball as part of that job and I saw no future in it. So, yeah, I always say I do a lot more than read tea leaves and look at crystal balls, because that would be boring. And although my job title is a lot more boring now, my job isn't. So, yeah, my job really is I'm a researcher, so I do research. And it's really trying to look at the trends that we're seeing grow. And obviously, it's been a really interesting time around the pandemic, just to see how behaviours have changed. I'm a psychologist as well by background, so really my interest is I always call it the most disruptive part of innovation, because that's not the technology, it's us. Because unless we embrace the technology and use it to change the way that we work, rest and play, it's pretty useless. So,
well, in terms of us and in terms of how we've changed, and we will have changed in lots of different ways, presumably. So I want to dig into some of those trends. Shaheen, interesting hearing about Nicola's background as a psychologist, because I know that thought of different backgrounds coming together very close to your heart.
No, absolutely. So we have a psychologist and we have a linguist who became a technologist. So you're interpreting the brain and I'm interpreting what's coming out of people's mouths, which is always fun. I think what's really interesting is the rise of psychology and actually having anthropologists and people that are looking at ethics in the boardroom, I think is going to, again, just become more and more normal. So I think this is going to be a really powerful conversation. So.
But it does very briefly go back to that thought around education, just sowing that seed that for many people thinking, well, technology might not be for me, I think you'd both contradict them.
Yeah, no, I think for sure, right, Nicola? I mean, I really do think we have to break down the barriers of the dark art of technology, as though it is some elite thing that only mathematicians can do and people that are highly analytical. You know, you get huge creativity in tech, you get people that are hugely analytical in the arts. And we've bifurcated that and made it sort of you're either or, and actually we need both, and we need the crashing and collision of them to come up with, you know, the solutions that we need.
So we'll explore some of those nuances, but Nicola, you've already got me wondering now, when you mentioned that word trends, just sort of whet our appetite. Give me an example of something you've been seeing.
Well, there's some very obvious ones, to be honest. I look at both consumers and employees, but I think the employee bit has come to the fore really during the pandemic. So I'm not sure any of us would probably about 18 months ago think that we were going to be sitting at home in our pyjamas and our slippers working.
Or half pyjamas.
Well, absolutely, yes. There are some very trendy kind of pyjamas that make you look as if you're properly dressed. But yeah, I mean, all you need is the top half, really. It doesn't really matter at the bottom. So, I mean, there are some obvious things. I think we've seen a massive shift to digital for obvious reasons, again, that, you know, we haven't been able to do things physically. So we've had to really look at how we do things digitally. And I keep saying, I mean, home working, for example, is not new. BT's first trials were back in 1992. I was involved with some of that stuff. Obviously, I was only 6 at the time, but really, I mean, then we proved it worked. We did a proper experiment, and I'm a big fan of experiments. But we did a proper experiment. It worked, but the technology wasn't quite there. We literally had to bulldoze people's front gardens in order to get a big enough top pipe in their house. And I guess, you know, if we'd had it even 10 years ago, we'd probably have struggled during the pandemic to adapt the way that we have adapted. So we've kind of got this perfect storm in terms of technology. We've got cloud, we've got collaboration tools, and we've got connectivity all coming together. Now, I've always said that that's been around for a long time, but that does not mean that suddenly we all adopted remote and home working. It's actually taken a pandemic to do that.
Yeah, to really sort of force that change.
Absolutely.
But, you know, I hear so many people talking, sometimes obsessing about the where. Where are we going to work? But I can already tell that you're a bit more interested in some slightly bigger questions than that.
Yeah, I'm interested. I mean, I've been looking at the future of work for about 11 years now. I actually checked when the project started. And, you know, I think it's become increasingly apparent that it's all about the work. It's not about where you work, and it's not really about when you work. It's all about the work. So how do we get work that works? Is my fundamental mission. And again, before the pandemic, a lot of the trends that we were talking about aren't vastly different to what I'm talking about now. But again, the pandemic has accelerated a lot of the issues that we were seeing with work. Things like, you know, long hours, burnout, well-being, all of those have become a big focus now. The trouble is that we tend to focus on the easy stuff to do rather than necessarily reinventing work, because that's a big thing to reinvent.
So let's go on a bit of a range here then. Shaheen, the new world of work, when is it at its best? Let's go to the sort of blue skies piece first.
I think it's at its best when you get all the brains in the business operating, whether it's virtually or together, operating in absolute synchronicity around mission and purpose. And I think that is the thing that drives people in the end. And especially if I think about the generation that's up and coming, they are teaching us. They're incredibly interesting in the way they think about work. And not just, the lazy stuff that we talk about, which is portfolio careers and actually, will they stay in a job for No, that essentially what they are really trying to understand is how is this work going to make a difference in whatever that means to them. And I think, the coalescing of people around that idea, whatever the ideas are going to be probably one of the most important moments for us moving forwards. We keep talking about the workplace, right? We keep talking about space, actually, and how do we, and real estate in this conversation. It's really interesting how many people are talking about, cross industries are talking about real estate. This isn't about the co-location of bodies. This is about the co-location of purpose. If we can get that right, I think we're onto something that is going to be a catalyst.
Doesn't it play back into, though, that word of inclusion? Because what you seem to be talking about is unlocking contribution.
Absolutely.
And that could be of ideas, but crucially, making sure that everyone feels comfortable to contribute.
Yeah, absolutely. You want an environment that is going to unlock potential.
Yeah, and I wonder how, let's just take this even beyond business, Nicola, how does this sort of impact even more broadly, these changes? I mean, is it in changing, for example, how organisations interact with their customers?
Oh, for sure. And again, that digital piece has been a key in terms of changing that relationship with customers. So again, we can't rely on the place bits. We've had to rethink a lot of things that we do, including interacting with customers, working from home, changing work practices, changing all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
But it has taken a pandemic to do that. And we could have done some of those changes for the better, probably before the pandemic, but a crisis magnifies the mind.
We might wonder why it took us so long in some cases. What about slightly more challenging side of it, the watch outs, the risks of getting this a bit wrong?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously a lot of the stuff I've been talking about, prior to the pandemic, we were talking about the digital office. Now it's about the hybrid. Everyone's going hybrid. And my anxiety there is what most people are meaning by hybrid, when I dig slightly deeper, is it's flexible working, which, implies 3 days in the office, 2 days at home. Maybe you're specific about that. So it's all about place. But it's not really all about place. And actually, the analogy I use with my favourite hybrid, which is the Zedonk, which is half zebra, it's half donkey. It looks a little bit like a donkey with zebra socks, to be perfectly honest. But I can tell you that the Zedonk does not spend 3 days a week as a zebra and 2 days a week as a donkey. It is a different breed entirely. And I think that's what we should be talking about, because hybrid work, to me, is a different type of work. It's a type of work that is disjointed from both time and place, and really focuses on employee experience. So how do we help employees work wherever they happen to be and whenever they happen to be? Now, my anxiety there is we're probably going to get some really horrible hybrids, which is why I think the experimentation piece is important, because we're going to get a lot of this wrong. It's new. Yeah. And that's why I think we need to experiment. And if we get it really wrong, we should probably learn from that. But horrible hybrids, the obvious one that everyone is saying is, if you've got a meeting where half of the people are physically in the room and half of the people are digitally, absolutely, to your point about being in the room, it's a nightmare. Now, I think we've learned during the pandemic that actually if you're all little celebrity squares on a screen, you can see everybody. So I was talking to a client a couple of weeks ago, and they said their mantra now is all room or all Zoom. Obviously, other providers are available, but Zoom kind of rhymes with everything.
But Nicola, isn't that sort of giving up on problem solving rather than going, it has to be all one or all the other? Don't we have to make the fusion better? That would be another way to solve it.
Completely right. And that's where we start to get into the rather more interesting technologies. I mean, there's a lot, I think, going on with augmented reality as well. So bringing it out from the 2D of the screen out into the 3D. And there's some really interesting stuff going on. Virtual reality, I'm a little bit more sceptical about. I think it's got some really good, compelling things with education and training, but I don't want to sit with a headset on for 7 hours a day. But augmented reality, I think, is an interesting, different way of collaborating. So we've got all sorts of things from our 5G ambulance, where we've got paramedics with an augmented reality headset on and a haptic glove, transmitting both high definition, real-time vision and also touch back to a remote medic in a hospital. And obviously they're then collaborating in a very different way.
Wow.
So we're starting to open it. I always say that starts to blur the front back office type thing.
Yeah.
So you're actually pushing a lot of these technologies into people that aren't probably working from home.
Exactly. Well, you've also just got a viewer and me wanting to do work experience with you, by the way. This does seem
Well,
pretty good.
and we're going beyond that as well. So we're going, the trendy thing to talk about at the moment is holograms. So there's stuff like, there's something called volumetric video, which is basically, I always say my entire Star Wars fantasies come true. So I can stand in holographic form in front of my team and say, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope.
You're my
Now,
only hope.
the thing is, that technology is really clunky at the moment. It's not easy to use, but I used to work in BT's video team 20 years ago. And hey, it's taken 20 years for video to come of age, and boy, has it come of age. So it might take a little while for that kind of technology to become simple enough.
So, I mean, the only challenge today, Shaheen, is I wish we had Nicola for much longer, actually, because I just want to say, let's grab a coffee and talk for another hour, actually. But very quickly, Shaheen, back to that point about watch outs. What keeps you up in terms of, this is all very good to have new freedoms, new flexibilities, but what do we miss? Who gets locked out? Who gets accidentally left out? What goes through your mind?
And I think we've talked about the in-the-room thing a couple of times now. I think that is keeping me awake at night. The other thing that I think is really interesting is what I call the casual corridor collision. And the casual corridor collision is where you have very powerful moments with people, which are often quite brief, that lead to incredibly interesting things. That, for me, feels like it has really been eroded at this moment.
And they weren't on the agenda.
It just happened. And that level of kind of, back to the psychology, that level of just human interaction, just that level of sitting in a room and being able to see someone that's physically... I actually think it does something to the psyche. I really do. And that level of... And we talked about creativity a number of times. When you're problem solving and when you're under pressure, I don't think there is anything yet that's compensating for me the room. Right?
Have we solved this yet? Have we got sort of serendipitous corridor collisions happening?
I mean, I always get slightly intrigued by that serendipity thing. Everyone always talks about coffee points, and we were trying to find out where the research was that proved that coffee points were profound. I found one paper. So it's not a profound argument. I also don't think... I think you can do digital serendipity because, frankly, I mean, firstly, if only the great people to bump into are in the office, I want to be in that office. But I think you can bump into great people in digital environments. It's just, digital is a lot more formal. So you actually have to start to schedule stuff. You don't get the kind of chance encounter. So the question then is, how do you re-engineer that chance encounter? Now, there are a lot of technologies. Certainly, I work with a lot of our academic partners in our wonderful innovation ecosystem, so people like MIT. So they're working on it. There are also some startups, and there's an app out there that I call it Tinder for the workplace. So what it tries to do is to say, hey, you've got similar interests to this person, go and have a virtual coffee. Now, that's terrifying, I have to say. I'm an introvert, I don't like that. But to your point earlier, Shaheen, I think that you don't get collaboration without purpose. And actually, one of the things I've been thinking about is how do you lead? Good leaders are very good at creating purpose and also creating that connection. So I'm wondering whether it needs to be more of an introduction service than a speed dating service. So how do we actually start to get... Again, you've got to have effort to do that. It's not spontaneous. But there is something that you can do, certainly, I think, in terms of creating digital serendipity.
This is fueling, Shaheen.
I was just going to... I mean, there's a really interesting point to pick up on there, Nicola. Just this idea of spontaneity, right? I don't know how any digital technologies would create an environment where improvisation happens, or that moment of just, that for me is going to be the next frontier. And I think that's going to be really interesting. And therefore the anthropologists and all of the people that we talked about start to become a really big part of the technology conversation, which I don't think we've got to yet. One thing. I think the other thing is the next generation that's coming in. You think about, even just barristers. I've been talking to a number of people in the legal field at the moment, and they're kind of saying the pupillage. How do you do a digital pupillage, right? And even for us, how do you teach on the job? Many of us learned by sitting in meetings. It's a really traditional,
Yes.
but we sat in meetings and we listened and we
Witnessing.
watched. We were witnessing, exactly. So the collective witnessing of something that gives you your education and helps you, move from your apprenticeship into the next stage of your career. That is going to be, again, something that I think we need to be solving for, because we are diluting that by virtue of potentially moving to whatever we call hybrid, right?
The only challenge with this conversation is that I have to bring it to an end because I want it to carry on. And you've got me thinking from zebras to a new form of introduction service. This is great. Nicola, no surprise at all. You were completely brilliant and totally will have got lots of conversations going. So thank you very much indeed.